Ladies and gentlemen, this morning it looks as though we are having some stocks go through what I'm calling a Trump pump and others going through a bit of a Trump dump. I'll explain which stocks are pumping and dumping in my portfolio and why. The first and possibly most obvious pump from the attempt over the weekend is Smith & Wesson Brands Inc. SWBI. This stock is a gun stock. During any period of, say, increased tension or unrest, and election years in general, gun stocks like SWBI tend to benefit from those increased tensions. A lot of the times it's based on perhaps fear that a new administration might be more strict on guns. On this one, I think it's more about the unrest and just general fear out there, and the tensions rising in the public. People are anticipating probably a spike in gun sales because of that. Therefore, SWBI stock has gone up. This one was probably one of the easier calls for me to make over the weekend, that my SWBI stock would probably jump a bit on Monday. So it's up 10%, just based purely on what happened over the weekend, I would say. People are sort of doing the math in their head and thinking, yeah, I could see gun sales spiking off of this. And as a result, they're anticipating that, and it drives up the price of Smith & Wesson stock. This is a smaller market cap. It's under $1 billion, but they are still one of the major gun makers in the US. The next stock I hold that got a little bit of a Trump pump would be Medical Properties Trust. This is a real estate investment trust. Now, why would a REIT pop up a little bit when the perception is that Trump probably is gaining in the polls and more likely to win in November? Well, I think there's a perception that should he win, which seems increasingly more likely given what happened over the weekend, that he would probably push for lower interest rates. He was known to press the Fed to keep interest rates low during his initial term from 2016 to 2020. Don't see why he would change course on that. And that could also tie in with some of his own personal self-interest, as a great deal of his personal wealth is definitely tied up in real estate holdings in the Trump organization. So the idea that he might enact policies that are more favorable for entities holding real estate assets, it seems to track, at least logically. And now we got to move on to the Trump dumps. Well, high tide. This should be no surprise to anybody that high tide ticked down today, because generally speaking, Republican candidates are not quite as in favor of descheduling or legalization, except for the actual strict libertarians who believe in absolute personal freedom. So based on that perception, the stock ticked downwards. This tells me that perhaps some of the shareholders have been holding basically on the hope of US legalization being the future vector of growth for the company, and that's most likely going to be pushed back quite a while if the Republican Party wins in November. However, if you look at the business fundamentals of high tide, and you realize that they still have growth left in their native Canada, as well as some possible future growth over in Germany, you might realize that there's still plenty for them to work on before any type of expansion or not into the US. And their value for what cash flow they currently produce, as well as what they can generate in terms of growth in just those markets, still makes it plenty worth the current price and beyond. And finally, we have Alibaba and other Chinese stocks. So Baba's down today, as is Tencent and JD. So Trump is no secret that he has some pretty aggressive rhetoric about China. He's all about the tariffs. He's all about saying things like, I beat China all the time. So given that, It may be expected that he won't be great for American and Chinese relationships, and probably not great for Chinese business, or potentially just the deterioration in relations makes it more likely that China cuts out American shareholders from their companies. Any of these things could be possibilities or what's on people's mind when they're selling these stocks today. But in all reality, I think Biden's already been pretty bad when it comes to shared prosperity, we'll say. In fact, they banned chip makers like Intel from exporting certain types of chips to Chinese companies like Alibaba. So I don't necessarily think this will be substantially worse in reality under Trump. It's just one of those perception things, at least in my opinion, so far. It will have to wait and see what the administration's actual policies are should he end up winning. But irrespective of that, if those issues and tensions are only temporary and the business is still undervalued and committed to returning value to shareholders, I'm not going to get spooked and jump ship just yet. It's not in my nature to make rush decisions the same day that there's some kind of big news moving price on something. I prefer to think it all the way through. Let me know which of your stocks pumped or dumped today with the Trump pump or dump effect. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel for more, like for the algo. Hop on Discord, link in the description if you like more in-depth discussions every single day on stocks, the political landscape and how it affects the markets, the macro environment, whatever you want to talk about. Also, make sure you catch me every Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern, Cashflow Kings Live, and follow me on Twitter at Mr. Machamog. Links are always in the description. Take it easy, everyone.